Before we delve into these dramatic new scientific developments, it's important to take note of our pop culture propaganda campaign aimed at children, the most vulnerable of all of us. In addition to Gore's entry last year into Hollywood fictional disaster films, other celebrity figures have attempted to jump into the game. Hollywood activist Leonardo DiCaprio decided to toss objective scientific truth out the window in his new scarefest, The 11th Hour. DiCaprio refused to interview any scientists who disagreed with his dire vision of the future of the Earth. In fact, his film reportedly features physicist Stephen Hawking making the unchallenged assertion that, and this is a quote now, the worst case scenario is that Earth will become like its sister planet Venus with a temperature of 250 degrees centigrade. I guess these worst case scenarios pass for science in Hollywood these days, and also fits perfectly with DiCaprio's stated purpose of the film. DiCaprio said on May the 20th of this year, "I want the public to be very scared by what they see. I want them to see a very bleak future." And while those who went to watch DiCaprio's science fiction film may see his intended bleak future, it is DiCaprio who has been scared by the bleak box office numbers, as his film has failed to generate any significant interest. Children are now the number one target for global warming fear campaign. DiCaprio announced his goal was to recruit young eco-activists to the cause. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "We need to get kids young." He said this on September 20th in an interview with USA Weekend. Hollywood activist Laurie David, that's Vice President Gore's co-producer of An Inconvenient Truth, recently co-authored a children's global warming book with Cambria Gordon for Scholastic Books, entitled The Down-to-Earth Guide to Global Warming. David has made it clear that her goal is to influence young minds with her new book when she recently wrote an open letter to her children stating, "We want you to grow up to be activists." Apparently, David and other activists are getting frustrated by the widespread skepticism on climate as reflected in both the U.S. and the U.K., according to the latest polls. It appears the alarmists are failing to convince adults to believe their increasingly shrill and scientifically unfounded rhetoric, so they have decided to go after the kids. But David should worry less about recruiting young activists and more about scientific accuracy. The science group found what it called a major scientific error in David's new kids' book on page 18. According to a Science and Public Policy Institute released on September 13th, and I'm going to quote right now, this is very significant, Mr. President. The authors, David and Gordon, present unsuspecting children with an altered temperature and CO2 graph that reverses the relationship found in the scientific literature. The manipulation is critical because David's central premise posits that CO2 drives temperature, yet the peer-reviewed literature is unanimous that CO2 changes have historically followed temperature changes, just the reverse of the reality. David has now been forced to publicly admit this significant scientific error in her book. A Canadian high school student named Mackenzie has shown Gore's climate horror film in 4 different classes, and the response was, "I really don't know why they keep showing it. It scares me." In June, the 4th grade class in Portland, Maine, East End Community School issued a dire climate report, quote, "Global warming is a huge pending global disaster," read the elementary school's report, according to an article in the Portland Press-Herald on June 14th of 2007. Remember, these are 4th graders issuing a dire global warming report. And this agenda of indoctrination and fear aimed at children is having an impact. 9-year-old Alyssa Ruzrika was quoted in Washington Post on April the 6th of 2007 as saying, "I'm worried about it because I don't want to die." The same article explained, psychologists say they're seeing an increasing number of young patients preoccupied by a a climatic Armageddon. I was told by the parent of an elementary school last spring, this was kind of interesting because we had a 3-hour discussion with Al Gore, and afterwards, after it was over, a lady came up to me, and she was from Maryland, and she was the mother of an elementary school teacher, and she said that they were required to actually watch this film about once a month, and her child would come home and have nightmares about drowning in the film's predicted scary sea level rise, which has been debunked, I might add. The Hollywood global warming documentary Arctic Tale ends with a child actor telling kids, quote, "If your mom and dad buy a hybrid car, you'll make it easier for polar bears to get around," end quote. Unfortunately, children are hearing the scientifically unfounded doomsday message loud and clear, but the message kids are receiving is not a scientific one. It's a political message designed to create fear, nervousness, and ultimately recruit them to liberal activism. There are a few hopeful signs. A judge in England has ruled that schools must issue a warning before they show Gore's film to children because of scientific inaccuracies and sentimental mush. That's a court. That's a judge in UK. Before they see it, they have to sign a disclaimer. In addition, there is a new kids' book called The Sky Is Not Falling: Why It's Okay to Chill About Global Warming. The book counters the propaganda from the pop culture. The chart here is the sky is not falling. Objective evidence based on science is beginning to crush hysteria. My speech today and these reports reveal that recent peer-reviewed scientific studies are totally refuting the Church of Man-Made Global Warming. Meteorologist Joseph Conklin, who launched a skeptical website, climatepolice.com, recently declared that global warming movement is falling apart. All the while, activists like former Vice President Al Gore repeatedly continue to warn of a fast-approaching climate tipping point. I agree with Gore in this respect. Global warming may have reached a tipping point. The man-made global warming fear machine crossed the tipping point in 2007, this year. And that's the reason that today I'm just talking about things that are happening this year, things really in the last 6 months. I'm convinced that the future climate historians will look back at 2007 as the year the global warming fears began to crumble.